Hi everyone, welcome to this More to Life webinar. This evening we have Kirsty Woodard, who has really generously joined us to give a webinar session on planning for ageing without children. So in a moment I'm going to hand over to Kirsty, who will be your main host for this evening. But I just want to say welcome, whether you're watching this live or watching it on our YouTube channel afterwards. There will be a question and answer session at the end. If you are watching it live, you can scroll along the bottom of the your screen and there's a Q&A icon. If you ask questions, whilst they won't be seen by everyone, we do recommend that you ask them anonymously, which is an option that's given. But do ask the questions and we will ask them at the end once Kirsty has finished her presentation. I am going to hand over now to Kirsty. Just bear with me. There we go. Thank you so much, Kirsty.
Okay. Thank you very much, Kat. And hello to everybody. And hopefully you can hear me. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in the webinar series. A little bit about me. I am aging without children. I am unable to have children. I am infertile, but I'd never really thought about that from a work perspective, even though I've worked with older people pretty much all my entire working life, which is 25 years now. One day I was having coffee with a friend of mine and we knew each other because we both worked for AWOC, which, as you probably know, is one of the largest charities for older people in the UK. And she was talking to me about the problems that she'd been having with her mother and her mother's care in hospital particularly, and her mother's aftercare from social services. And she was talking to me and it was a very familiar story of, you know, problems with, you know, getting equipment, getting carers, you know, getting things sorted out, filling in forms, phoning up endless people, all that sort of thing. And I think it's fair to say she was pretty much at the end of her tether. And at the end of having a good old vent to me, she said to me, God knows what she'd do if I wasn't here. And it was a real light bulb moment, because I thought, yes, what would her mother have done? Who would have phoned social services to make sure the care was happened? Who would have gone and picked up the equipment? Who would have filled out the form? Who would have done all of those things for her? And who will do those things for me as a person without children? And what happens to people in later life if there's no children to help with unpaid care and support? And so, because I'd worked in the age sector for a very long time, I went and spoke to a number of the people that I knew and said, what about, you know, have we ever thought about people who are aging without children, or indeed any other family? And the answer was pretty much a categorical no. And at that point I thought, then we need to do something about that. And so after having conversations with a couple of people, some of whom you will certainly have heard of, including Jodie Day and Robin Hadley, who looks at childlessness in older men, we set up AWOC. And the purpose of AWOC is to campaign and raise awareness around the issues facing people in later life without children. And the purpose of today is to help you think about your later life if you don't have children. It's but also to hopefully bust some myths about later life and old age, to look at some of the key factors around successful aging. What do we know works in helping to live a good later life, and also to give you some useful further sources of information. So what do we mean when we talk about later life? Well, generally when we talk about later life, it's anything over 50, which, as I'm sure you're already sat there thinking, well, 50 actually seems quite young, and actually that also encompasses a very big age range, and absolutely it does. And one of the challenges for anybody working in the field of later life is, how do you effectively think about 3 different generations of people? But when people are talking about later life, it's generally that period once people are over the age of 50. So I want to start off by busting a few myths for you. Old age is portrayed incredibly negatively in the UK. We internalise ageism very, very quickly. We generally think of old age as a time of loss, of dependency, of loneliness, of disability, of having no fun, of never doing anything, never going anywhere. But as you can see from what is on the screen, that's actually not the reality. You will have seen, I'm certain, the massive amounts of coverage around loneliness and older people, and you'd be quite well forgiven for thinking that loneliness is absolutely guaranteed in later life, that this is what's going to happen, is that everybody in later life is probably going to be lonely. But as you can see, only 12% of older people actually describe themselves as chronically lonely, which I think is probably much, much lower than you would expect. Again, there's a massive amounts of coverage around things like dementia and Alzheimer's. And again, you would be forgiven for thinking that Alzheimer's is something that's almost guaranteed to happen to you in later life. But actually 84% of older people don't develop dementia. And so again, this idea that that is what is going to happen to us all is not true. Despite that, there is a massive amount of fear about it. Only 16% of people aged over 85 live in a care home. And again, from the coverage in the media, particularly around whether people have to sell their houses to go into residential care, you would think that that number is actually much higher. But less than 500,000 people, 500,000 older people actually live in a care home in this country. The vast majority of older people will live in their own homes for a very, very, very long period of time. And this is one of my favourite statistics. 82% of people over the age of 65 say they're happy every day or most days, which is the highest of any age group. And I think that's absolutely brilliant. You know, again, this idea that old age is this time of loneliness and sadness and unhappiness and declining health and all those sorts of things. Older people are more likely to be happy than any other age group. So I hope with that you sort of feel already a bit better about, you know, later life and what may or may not be waiting for you. It is true to say that there are some differences for people aging without children. Principally, one of the key differences for us is that we're more likely to be carers. People aging without children are a third more likely to be carers for their own parents. And indeed with AWOC we find that one of the key trigger points for people contacting us is when people have been caring for their own parents and think, who is going to be there to care for me? And the other thing that is more likely if you are aging without children at the moment is that you are more likely to go into a care home, because of there not being the informal support network. So there are some things that are different for us. But generally, as you can see, later life is not something that should be feared. It is something that should be celebrated. The fact that we're all living longer and we are all generally living healthier for longer is something that we should be really pleased and proud of, and not regard as this terrible tsunami of aging that's going to overwhelm us all. Older people have a tremendous amount to offer in terms of life skills, in terms of knowledge, and we should really harness that rather than having this very, very negative view about it. We do know through research carried out by the Centre for Aging Better, which is an organisation that looks at research and best practice around aging, you know, what are the key factors around having a successful later life? And they have pulled out 3 factors. The first is health, which I'm sure you won't be surprised about. The longer people can keep active, the longer people can maintain muscle strength, the longer people can maintain balance, the better their health will be, and the better their later life will be. So there really is so many benefits to remaining active, you know. And we're not talking about, you don't have to run marathons. I mean, there's always this kind of terrible thing about, you know, you have to run marathons, or you have to skydive, no, you don't have to do any of those things. Swimming, walking, Pilates, yoga, anything like that, anything that keeps you healthy, anything that keeps you active and moving is incredibly beneficial, and something that we really should all try and do. The second one is financial security. And this doesn't mean having vast amounts of wealth, though of course that would be nice. It means having enough money to cover your essentials. And obviously what your essentials are will vary from person to person and from lifestyle to lifestyle, but having enough money to do the things you absolutely feel are essential to your life is the real key thing, rather than having vast amounts of money. And the third thing is social connections. And that includes obviously social connections that may be with family, if you have it, with friends, and a feeling of belonging in the community where you live. Those are the three key things to living a good later life. But interestingly, when the Centre for Aging Better were looking at this, what they discovered was that they could divide later life into 6 groups. What they call the thriving boomers, the downbeat boomers, the can-do and connected, the worried and disconnected, the squeezed middle-aged, and the struggling and alone. And what's really interesting about these segments is that if you can see on the screen, they actually have very many similar characteristics, but the outcomes and their view on life is often very, very different. We know that people can have a very similar lifestyle in terms of health and income. They can be financially secure, they can have very good health, but they can actually not be that happy. And often they're not that happy because they feel they have a lot of regrets. They feel angry about being older, they have regrets about things they didn't do in their life, and they're not content, they haven't come to terms with things from their past. Similarly with the can-do and connected versus the worried and disconnected. Even here, some people in poor health, possibly lacking much disposable income, but actually the can-do and connected have higher levels of happiness. And the reason for that is because they have strong social connections and a positive outlook. Whereas the worried and disconnected have a similar lifestyle in terms of health and money, but feel often very socially isolated, they have lost connections, they have lost friends, etc. So as you can see, it's the health and the income do matter, but what the Centre for Aging Better's research really shows is what really matters is that connectivity, is those support networks. And that's where, for people aging without children, that's where sometimes that can be a problem, because as we know, when you are without children, sometimes that can be quite an isolating and excluding experience. People can be quite judgmental. You can feel that you don't fit in because people are often talking about their children or they're talking about their grandchildren. But I think it's important to say that you can find your tribe. I mean, there's fantastic work going on by organisations out there to bring childless and child-free people together, to look at issues, you know, to look to set up meet-up groups and walking groups and book clubs and coffee groups, and you know, I'm sure you'll be familiar with the work of Gateway Women, but there are more groups now that are starting up for people who don't have children, so that they can get together and form those social connections which you can lose as your friends become parents and you don't. And it's what we find with AWOC is that people will come to us and say, actually, it wasn't even so much of a problem when my friends were all parents, because sometimes they actually really wanted not to talk about their children. But and now I'm a grandparent. Now I'm at the age where my friends are grandparents. They talk about their grandchildren a lot, and I'm starting to feel excluded. So there is a sense, you know, certainly in terms of what AWOC is trying to do, we're trying to connect people aging without children in later life together, so that they won't feel excluded because they don't have grandchildren. But there are lots of ways to connect into the community, and to make new networks. I mean, volunteering is always a good way. Shared interest groups, physical activities, walking groups, for example. And one of the things that we've certainly found is that people aren't all, you know, if people can kind of almost own their feelings around aging without children. I have to say I'm personally very unapologetic about the fact I don't have children. If people ask me, I do tell them why not, and I know that not everybody feels they're able to do that, but I generally find that people are quite, oh, I'm sorry, but we're able to move past it. So, and I think the more understanding and awareness that there is around childless, child-free people, and the more understanding and awareness there is that lots and lots of people now, over 20% of people over the age of 50 don't have children, there are more of us, and we'll become more connected with each other. So in terms of thinking about what is good for what makes a positive later life, one of the things we're really bad at in this country, whether we have children or whether we don't, is thinking about our old age. And for all the reasons that I've said before, that people feel that it's a time of loss and sadness and, you know, denial. None of us plan to get old. I think that's very true. None of us plan to get old. That's old age is for other people. And so we put off thinking about it, and we put off planning for it. But if you are aging without children, indeed anybody, planning for later life, you know, we're talking about people's life expectancy now is well into their 80s. We can have another 30, 40 years when we stop work. So, you know, we really do need to think about the kind of later life we want. And so there are areas. What areas do we need to think about? The first area is, you know, what do you see yourself doing in later life? Do you see yourself as still working? Is that your plan, or do you think, right, okay, absolutely as soon as I can, I'm retiring and I'm off? And if that is the case, what are you then going to do with the sort of 25, 30 years of life that's hopefully left to you? Do you want to volunteer? Do you want to travel? You know, what will you be doing? You know, how do you see your later life? If it helps, it's quite useful to think about it in two chunks, sort of that kind of post-retirement, sort of 10, 15 years when hopefully you should still have good health, be physically active, and perhaps the time after that where your health might not be as good and you might be thinking about a different kind of lifestyle. Where will you be living? One of the things we know is that 80% of people over the age of 65 want to remain living in the house they're living in at the age of 65. But often our houses are not terribly older people friendly. We have lots of stairs, we have lots of steps, we have baths that can be difficult to get in and out of. So it's thinking about, you know, if this is the house I want to stay in for the rest of my life, may I need to make some adaptations to it? What might those be? If I want to live in a different house, what sort of house do I want to live in? Where do I want to live? Do you have dreams of retiring to the country, or do you have dreams of living by the sea, and how practical is that, and what's around there? Are you looking at co-housing? Are you looking at kind of getting together with some friends and buying a house and employing carers yourself? There's a possibility of things like home share, where people will come and live with you and offer support for a couple of hours a week. So again, there's lots of things to be thought about in terms of where you want to live. In terms of, you know, to have a full understanding of what your financial position will be. As I said earlier, it's not really about having vast wealth, but it is about, you know, can I afford the kind of later life I want? And in order to know that, you need to know the kind of later life you want to have. Who's going to be in your life? Who do you see as being around in your life? Do you see, you know, if you have a partner, do you see them still being in your life? Do you have a wider family? Do you have friends? You know, who do you see as being around? And who's going to be there when you need help later on? Have you made a power of attorney? Who would be the power of attorney in your life? Have you discussed this with anybody? Have you thought about what you might like to happen to you should you need help? Have you looked at how services work? It's really useful to think, to understand, while you don't need them, how social care works, because certainly from the media coverage there's a lot of misunderstanding about how social care works. Research what help is out there. You know, I'll guarantee you'll be amazed at how much help there is actually out there, and it really helps to find out about it before you need it, rather than in a time of crisis when you really need it, and you also perhaps are not well enough or don't have enough time to find it when you really need it. You know, so really, you know, what we would say is sit down and write a plan. It doesn't have to be, you know, War and Peace. Even if you just jot down some things on a piece of paper somewhere, start to think about, what's the kind of later life I want to have? How feasible is that later life going to be? What will I have to change in order to get it? Who do I need to talk to about it? How can I make this happen? Because the more you think about it in advance, the more likely you are to be able to have the kind of later life that you want. And for people aging without children, writing things down is really important, because we don't often have anybody, we don't have a family who can advocate for us. We don't have people who perhaps know us. So certainly you'll see, you can download from the internet things about what you might like should you have dementia. There are things about, you know, what you might like for end of life care. Write it down. Write these things down so that people can read what you've written and think, yeah, okay, I know, and now I understand more about what people want. On here is a list of sources of help. These are just a few sources of help. But as I said, you know, research is really important. Understanding and knowledge of the system, of the health and social care system, and housing, and the other support that's out there is really helpful. The more you understand, the less of a problem it will be later on when you need to access help. And finally, a quote from Anne Karpf, who has written a book about aging, which won several awards. The more we're able to understand how ageist assumptions shape our thoughts and our behaviour, the less hold they will have over us. As we begin to identify the caricatures and prejudices we've internalised and understand their social origins, they become more resistible. And this makes it more possible to age more freely and to become more fully ourselves. And I like to think about later life as that time when we can be more fully ourselves, when we're not so bound by work and expectations, but we can actually be completely free. I'm sure you're all familiar with the poem, "When I am old, I shall wear purple and eat butter and cream." And that's absolutely how it is. Later life is the time when you can wear purple or red or green and eat whatever you like and be yourself, because there isn't anybody there to stop you. Thank you very much.
Hi there, Kirsty. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you so much for that. There was a lot of information in quite a short amount of time there. I think that other people will agree. I love just the whole kind of, I love how you make it sound much more joyful. You said before we came on air that you know, that it's actually quite a positive experience, and it's really nice to think about that, because I think that many of us kind of dread the idea of getting old, and so it's that's a really spin isn't the right word, but I really like your take on that. The other thing I really like the idea of was the co-housing. It's like a student house but for old people. I love the idea. That makes that sound fun. But I think that there's a couple of things that you said that are interesting, and one of them I know More to Life is working really hard on, and that is the connections. And it's something that we, you know, that we talk about time and time again. Actually, before I go on, I'm just going to remind everyone that they can ask questions. Along the bottom toolbar there is a Q&A icon, and you can ask questions there, so please do ask Kirsty while she's here, because you don't get this very often. And yes, do ask the questions there, please. But the connections, and it can be such a struggle even now, you know, for people to meet like-minded people who are childless not by choice. And because I think as you get older, it's harder to make new friends anyway. And I think we assume that a lot of people do it at the school gates. I know, because like my parents, you know, they've got friends that they made when I was a child at school, and my sisters. I think I've read before now that the most successful place to make friends as an adult is a singing group.
A singing group,
yeah. So, you know, join a choir if you can sing, or if you like singing. If you don't, that's a terrible idea. But yeah, certainly the connections can be really difficult. And Gateway Women, you mentioned, absolutely are fantastic. And actually, Jodie Day, who founded Gateway Women, is doing our next webinar next month on the 3rd of July, where she'll be talking about grief. But Gateway Women have meetups all over the country. More to Life, we have there's not as many at the moment, but we are going to grow them. So there's one in Kent, there's one in Hertfordshire, and they quite often meet in the middle in London. There's one in Derby, there's one in Scotland, I want to say it's in Edinburgh, and there's one in Northern Ireland as well. So they are across the country. There are, you know, groups across the country, but we are looking to grow them as well. Someone has asked a question here. Can you tell us more about AWOC? I knew I'd forget this word. So AWOC is Aging Without Children. Acronym.
Yeah.
That's the word I was looking for. Can you just tell us a bit more about the organisation?
Sure, absolutely. Aging Without Children was set up formally in 2015, and our remit is to work with people who don't have support from their children in later life, which we define as being over 50, whether they are childless not by choice, whether they are child free, whether they have no children in their life because they are estranged from them, whether they were bereaved and their children predeceased them, if their children, for example, have a disability, which means their children actually wouldn't be able to offer them support. So we have a very broad range, and primarily that's because I've spent my life working with older people in the health and social care system, and I know exactly how difficult it is if you don't have anyone to advocate for you. And so what we do is we carry out research, because there is an astonishing lack of research around the issue of people aging without children. There's very little understanding of the issues that affect people aging without children. There's very little understanding of the impact that it has on their lives. So one of the things we do is we carry out research. We have an online group. We have a Facebook group where people can come and, you know, meet online and sort of share issues or vent or whatever. We're working on having some local groups as well. We have a thriving group in York. We're looking at setting up some groups in the southwest and in Dorset. And we work with other organisations to ensure that organisations concerned with ageing understand the issues facing people aging without children, because what's very interesting is I assumed when I set AWOC up that I would go and talk to the large age organisations, all of whom I knew, and say, there's this group of older people, they don't have any family, we think that there are some issues there. And the response was very much, well, no, we don't think it's an issue. We don't really see what the problem is. So a lot of what we do is actually sort of trying to educate organisations and say, you can't go on just assuming that all older people have got family. You just can't do that. And so a large part of what we do around that is as well. So we do training with organisations, we have workshops for them. So yeah, that's what we do.
Brilliant. No, that's fantastic. And it's true, I think, and you did touch upon it. I'm just seeing if I'd write anything specific, but about, well, I wrote that I love how that you say, like, you're unapologetic about being childless, and that you are just open about it, because the more people that are, the more people that will understand that it is an experience, and kind of that we're all living, and that it's kind of normal, and although we do appreciate that not everyone is ready to kind of talk about their own experiences openly, but if you are, then you will help break the taboo that is around childlessness, and so it's great that you are speaking with organizations, because that is a huge part of the battle, isn't it? To actually get organizations to consider us as a group of people, rather than just assume that everyone is a parent. So I think that's fantastic work.
Absolutely. And I think, particularly one of the things in terms of social care policy is that if you read what the government say about older people, what they say is families have to do more. There is no recognition that there are older people out there who don't have any family at all. There is no recognition of that at government level. And that is an incredibly dangerous thing, because while generally speaking, old age is a positive thing, and most people live most of their later life very healthy, very happy, inevitably there does come a point where our body does wear out, and our health does decline, and we do need help and support. And we think it's wholly unacceptable for the government just not to consider what happens to people who don't have family. Because the government's response is, oh well, people's families should look after them, and we're like, well, whether or not you think that's true for people who have families, it's completely irrelevant if you don't actually even have one.
Absolutely. We have got a few questions here. I don't know if you mentioned it. I see. No, the link that there was a slide with lots of links, which
yes.
So just to let everyone know that this video will be available on YouTube shortly, over the next few days. If you do have specific questions, you can email myself. I think that Kirsty's details will also put them up. They're on the Fertility Network website. But you mentioned in the slide about the University of the Third Age. Can you talk a little bit more about that yourself at the moment, or would you recommend that they have a look at the website?
The website, have a look at the website is best, but briefly, the University of the Third Age is an organisation for people over the age of 50, which where people meet together and study different topics, which sounds far more formal than it actually is, because it's this massive range of things. So you can get together and sort of study 18th century paintings, or you can get together and you can study flower arranging, or you can get together and do cosmology or whatever. I mean, it's just the most amazing organisation, and it tends to be, meetings are usually either in people's homes or in community centres or whatever. There's a whole network of them across the country, and they are just a really fantastic way of meeting people who share an interest with you, because I think that is one of the things. If the only shared interest people can see is grandchildren, then that's when I think that whole thing around connections and conversations really struggles. But if you're sat around a table and actually what you're all really interested in is Tudor history, then that's what you talk about, and that's how you make those connections, and that's how it comes. So yeah, have a look at their website, it's fantastic. But yeah, they're a brilliant organisation, absolutely brilliant.
Fantastic. Well, that's praise indeed. And it's interesting what you said about when people become parents and you're friends with them, they kind of tend to be a bit more understanding about the fact you haven't got children, However, once they get to being a grandparent, there's almost less of a kind of thought, I guess, behind it, really, less consideration perhaps. And so you're absolutely right, having a group that you go to because you all have something in common, you know, whether it's a history group. I know that they do kind of churches, like the history of churches, any like art group, walking group, that gives you something else to focus on, which is a really positive thing. And I think however old you are, really, that's a really good way to go. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Meetup is a fabulous invention. You know, Meetup is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I live in a very small rural village in Somerset, and, you know, but Meetup will tell me, you know, things going on within 10 miles of where I live, you know, filtered by my interests. And it's fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
So for those that don't know, Meetup is a website, and it gives you, as Kirsty has just said then, you know, a myriad of different groups and things that are going on in your area, and you can filter it by your interest, you can filter it by location, by date. So yeah, head on to Google and Google Meetup, and you will see there's a huge amount, and a lot of the Gateway Women meetups are actually advertised on there as well.
Yeah.
Someone has asked how to keep joyful if you're aging and childless in view of the fact that you will always experience bereavement, and the longer you live, the more deaths you will experience.
That's more of that. I have to say, aging without children doesn't really come at this from an emotional point of view, I have to be honest. And so I'm not sure I'm actually qualified to answer that.
Don't worry, and I think it's great that, you know, AWOC is there to think about some of the practicalities. I think that the session next month with Jodie Day, which is about grief, I think that will, if you want to join in for that session, or we'll definitely be putting up on the YouTube video afterwards, then I think that is a really good question perhaps to ask Jodie. I think that she'll be able to give a much more rounded response to that, if that's okay. And then someone has asked whether or not we can have the slides for this. If you want to email me, the details are on the Fertility Network website, which is how you registered to this. Then I can send out the slides individually. As I said, the video will be going onto YouTube as well, so you will be able to re-see them. And if you wanted to take any notes, then you can pause it then and take any notes from the slides in particular. If anyone else has any questions, please do ask now. The other link that we'll share as well is to the AWOC Facebook group. What we'll probably do with that is we'll share it on the More to Life Facebook page, so that people can go directly onto there. So if you are on Facebook, we do have a More to Life UK Facebook page, so you can head over and like that. And it is More to Life UK, and then we will share the details of this webinar when it goes live, and also the Facebook group for AWOC. Right, I think that that's all the questions for now, but I really just want to say thank you so much, Kirsty. That's really, really interesting, and the more people that we can tell about AWOC, the more people that realise it's there from that practical point of view. I think that's so important, and for everyone to start thinking about kind of what their older life is going to look like is a really interesting idea, actually, and not something that I've thought about before. And like you say, you don't want to think about it necessarily in many ways, but it's going to be a much better life if we do, and start planning for it now. You know, just a little bit of work, like you say, writing some stuff down is really, really important. But yeah, thank you so much. We really, really, really appreciate it, and a couple of people have come in and said thank you. It's really, really interesting, so thank you.
No problem. Thank you very much for asking me.
Oh no, no, my pleasure. All right then, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for watching this webinar. We really appreciate you attending or watching the replay on YouTube. As I said, next month we have Jodie Day, who's going to be talking about grief. You can go to our website, fertilitynetworkuk.org, to register for those, for all of the webinars. And it means you'll get a reminder, so that you make sure you make it live, so that you can ask questions directly to the hosts. Okay, I'm going to bid you a good evening, and see you again soon. Okay? Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.